Hey guys, it's Kendra.
And this is Jessica, and you're listening to
Lucid Lab.
We're back again.
Hopefully you've missed us.
I hope so.
We have missed talking, not so much all of the organization and the editing and all of that. It's been a very busy June for us. And we once again thank you for sticking with us and having patience as we worked through the last 6 weeks of our chaotic lives.
Yes, thank you so much because it was necessary and we're both in really good places now and just ready to continue what we've started because this was our baby and it's still our baby, but now we're ready to just take things up a notch.
We are. And since you guys have been waiting for new content, we're not going to elaborate too much more. We will catch you up maybe in the next couple of weeks. But right now, we're just trying to get back into the rhythm of recording. So I think we're just going to go into the episode. So what do you have for us today, Jessica?
So this story I came upon randomly when searching for hauntings because I have been in a true crime rut. Like we talked about.
And you're trying to get out of it?
Yeah. But in doing so, somehow I still ended up with true crime.
You had good intentions.
I did. Honestly, it's silly of me to say because we always say that more often than not, hauntings are because of something true crime related.
Truth.
And it is the more compelling part of the story.
True.
So not a surprise that I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
Today I'm covering an unsolved murder.
Unsolved are always intriguing because then we get to go into all the theories.
And there are several viable suspects that we're going to cover.
Okay.
This is the case of 25-year-old Sigrid Stevenson. She was found viciously murdered on the stage of her school's theater in 1977.
Oh my God, at the school.
Yes, and it is still an active investigation today. So let's get into it because it is a crime in and of itself that this poor girl's murder is still not solved after 47 years. Sigrid Miller Stevenson was born on January 24th, 1952 to Peter Cooper Stevenson and Barbara Jean Smith Stevenson in Alameda County, California. She grew up in Livermore, which is about an hour and 10 minutes east of San Francisco. Prior to her birth, her parents lived on the East Coast. Peter was a lieutenant in the Marine Corps and had attended Princeton University before marrying Barbara in 1946. Barbara went to Vassar College in New York, majoring in economics.
Very well educated.
But she would give up her studies and career path to be a homemaker once they had Sigrid. Sigrid was the firstborn. Her younger sister, Sylvia, was born 3 years later. Peter went on to be a researcher while doing his postgraduate at the University of California before being employed as a nuclear chemist at the Livermore National Lab. And from that, they lived pretty comfortably.
Sounds like both went to Ivy League schools.
Not much is known about Sigrid's childhood other than that she was described as a fun-loving and quirky child and that she had a deep passion for music from a young age. So did her father. He first introduced her to the guitar, which she loved, but ultimately her favorite would be the piano. She was a piano prodigy. After listening to a tune for just a few minutes, she could instantly play it on the piano.
I'm so jealous of people like that.
That's kind of my daughter.
Is she?
She can do that.
Mm-hmm.
She can remember music instantly. But she also has a very small attention span, so she does not do it enough. She was good in school, but her focus was not on academics. Music and the arts had and kept her attention for the rest of her short life. Growing up, she played in many recitals and for theater productions. She was also in the show's acting. Friends described her as loving, fun, and adventurous. She knew what she wanted out of life and just wanted to experience it. Although she could be friendly and make friends easily if she wanted to, she preferred her alone time with her music, journaling, or drawing. In some ways, maybe she felt misunderstood or simply did not care what anyone thought. She never had that one best friend, but was thought of kindly by people, although some did consider her to be eccentric.
Okay.
She was known to take very long walks, something you and I can definitely understand.
I love long walks.
That's where we release and do our best thinking.
Definitely.
And she was a deep thinker, complex. So I feel connected to her.
She sounds like my kind of person.
And there were plenty who didn't understand her because later, after what happens, some would go on to call her weird, strange, and unorthodox. I would argue that she was a bit of a genius and that, that can be difficult to relate to.
Right. And she could have been on the spectrum that comes with savants. A lot of times when you're like amazing at one thing, your social skills aren't,
And she was, I guess you could say, obsessed with it.
Right.
And her brain was just operating a lot quicker than the majority of us, I guess. But in all, from what I could find, even though she was almost fiercely independent, she was still very personable. I just think it took the more creative types to connect with her because
that's where she
her
was.
Vibe. At the age of 18, the 5'7", brown-haired, blue-eyed Sigrid graduated from Livermore High School. She went on to pursue her bachelor's in music at the University of California at Riverside. She wanted to be a concert pianist, and she was good enough to really have done some amazing things, but we all have our doubts and our abilities, so she started looking into getting her teaching certificate on the side. While in college, she taught music to special needs children. She really loved children and put a lot of time and focus into that. She wasn't out partying or anything like that. In fact, in college, she rarely hung out with anyone. Her parents wanted her to have fun in college. They experienced that. They wanted her to be more involved in social activities, but it was just never her thing.
You can't force that.
She was content being alone and focusing on the things that she loved. She practiced for hours every day. She had zero time for romance. She lived and breathed playing the piano, which is not an easy instrument to be obsessed with.
No, not at all.
It's not like she can carry it anywhere. So whenever she had access to one, no matter where it was, she would play for as long as she could. And when I say she was good, she was good. She graduated from Riverside at 22 in 1974 and then spent a couple of years kind of hopping from place to place, traveling, teaching music, living life. But ultimately, she would end up back at school, this time at Trenton State College in Ewing Township, New Jersey, pursuing a master's in music.
Wow, she went the opposite coast.
Trenton State College, which is about 30 miles east or so of Philadelphia, was a long way from home, as far away as she could go. But she went there because of the music program.
Okay.
At the time, it had one of the best music schools in the country. During her first year, she shared a dorm with a girl named Marie DePasquale, who was concerned about Sigrid. She thought she was almost too carefree. She mentioned that Sigrid hitchhiked a lot.
Oh, no.
Which I think was pretty common back
it's
then.
The 70s, yeah.
She would go backpacking by herself, and Marie just thought Sigrid didn't really consider her own safety at times. And that's just something to say because a lot of people back then, and I'll come to it, I believe, end up just blaming Sigrid for her own murder.
I hate that.
And I hate it.
And the 70s was when serial killers were on a rampage because of this was the culture. Everybody was carefree and they were hitchhiking and they were going out doing things alone because it was like free.
And they were taking
times.
advantage of it.
Yeah, they were.
While at school, Sigrid spent the majority of her time at Kendall Hall. Oh, and by the way, it's not Trenton State College now. Today, it's the College of New Jersey.
Okay.
A lot of the campus has changed over the years, but Kendall Hall, which was built in 1932, is still there. And actually, how I came upon this with stories from staff and students and the eerie things they feel in this building. She practiced for hours on the piano there. And a lot of the time, this was done at night because it was otherwise in use by others during the day.
That makes sense.
It seemed like anyone who frequented this hall knew that not all of the locks actually locked on the doors very well. On the rear of the building, there was one door that, although locked, if you yanked on it hard enough, it would give in and you could get into this building.
Okay.
She wasn't supposed to be there after hours, but she was a bit of a rebel.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like she's having a rager in there. She just wanted to play the piano.
Very innocent.
That was her home. And most people knew that is where she would be. She would even spend the night under the stage sometimes.
Oh, that's dedication.
There was campus security that would check the halls and make sure no one was in there. She got in trouble often for breaking the rules too many times, but what are they really going to do? Like expel her for playing the piano?
She's doing nothing wrong, right?
I think if anything, it was just more annoying for them because she refused to listen. Like she would leave, but then she'd be like, I'll be back tomorrow.
She's like, you can't stop me.
And she wasn't the only one to have done that over the years. People knew that they could get into this building.
Okay.
So it is the summer of 1977. School's out. Sigrid did some more light traveling. Otherwise, she stayed relatively close. She was still teaching kids on the side, and she ended up needing somewhere to lay her head at some point. So she rented a room from one of her professors, Alan Lutz, and his family. That lasted until August when she had to find somewhere else to stay. I'm not sure why, but she ended up moving into the home of a local fireman and his family. It was kind of a similar agreement. She just had a room in the home. She was looking forward to the next school term, but it wasn't time just yet, so she fit in another bit of travel before school started. She hitchhiked alone and did this pretty large trip through New England, over the Canadian border, and into Nova Scotia. Outside of starting school, she had set up another job and she was going to start teaching at Fisher Middle School.
Okay.
She came back from her backpacking trip on Friday, September 2nd. School was set to start the following Wednesday for some students, but officially starting September 8th, which is kind of later
Back in the days when school started after Labor Day.
Oh, okay. I found the actual school bulletin for the 1977-78 school year. It's archived on the school website. It was neat to see like all the classes and dates and pictures and the map of the campus.
Right.
But Sigrid was in a bit of a pickle because the fireman and his family were out of town and she couldn't get into the house until they got back. So she had to get creative and decided that she was going to stay at Kendall Hall in the meantime.
Oh, okay.
Which for her was probably just fine because she got to play as much as she wanted and she had been gone.
Without a piano. Can't backpack with that.
Nope. I'm sure she wouldn't have minded an actual bed at that point in a shower, but she did have some stuff with her. Some people question why she couldn't stay at the house yet. And I thought back to this. Maybe she wasn't actually staying there just yet. It was just something that was set up
Lined
for the
up.
school year and they're on a trip. And so she just couldn't get in yet. Regardless, she ends up deciding to stay at Kendall Hall.
Okay.
As I mentioned before, Sigrid liked to write in her journal. She wrote in there a lot. So we have some idea of her time there. After weeks of not practicing, she talks about how achy and stiff her fingers were. After practicing again for the first time, she was planning to stay at Kendall for 3 to 5 days whenever that family got home. And at the time, the campus was a ghost town.
Okay.
Soon it would be filled with over 9,000 undergraduate, grad, and part-time students. I couldn't find the exact number, but it was a lot. In all, there were about 50 people on the campus that weekend. There was a theater workshop happening at the time. They were using the stage in Kendall Hall.
Okay.
It sounds like the theaters were open year-round for different plays and operas for other groups.
Local groups.
Exactly. And there were actually 2 theaters in Kendall Hall. There was one for musical performances, which was for plays and operas, called the Stage Theater. The other theater that I mentioned first is the one that Sigrid used, which is the musical one.
Makes sense.
So Sigrid spent Friday night there, and the next night on September 3rd, there was a final performance for the local theater group at the Stage Theater, which Sigrid saw some of. I'll come back to that because she did have some interactions that night with people from this theater group, and one is a suspect.
Okay.
In her final journal entry, she mentions that she needed to get to sleep as early as possible that night so she could wake up early and practice the piano because security was set to come by and check the building in the morning. She made note that she wanted to be out by 11 a.m., which is when they usually came around. Apparently, she had them all clocked. This entry was made sometime before 12:30 a.m., the morning of September 4th. And we only know this because she was already downstairs writing this while some of the theater group members were still at the hall cleaning up and leaving around that time.
Okay.
There is only one alleged sighting of Sigrid after this time, and it could not be confirmed. A friend of Sigrid's mentioned to officers that they saw her Sunday morning at a movie theater. The theater was apparently 15 miles from the school, but I couldn't find the time, who saw her, if she was in the theater or what.
Yeah.
I assume if it's morning time, she would maybe be walking around outside of that theater, not inside, but I don't know what time they started movies back then.
I can't imagine that early.
I think here we start them at 11 a.m., so it would kind of match up with the time of her saying she needed to be out by 11, so it's a possibility.
And maybe that's where she was going to kill time until she could get into the house.
Well, she wouldn't be at the house yet because she was planning to stay in Kendall Hall for 3 to 5 days. So she would have just been going back to Kendall Hall.
Okay. She just had to go hide somewhere from security for a while.
Exactly.
So a movie theater might make sense.
Yeah. She can go watch a movie. But it is unclear because they haven't confirmed it. And I'm also not sure if security confirmed checking the theater that she was at the school that morning or not. So this brings us to the night of September 4th. Even though school wasn't in session yet, there were cops and security guards on campus. There were 12 police officers and 7 security guards. Just before 11 p.m. that night, 22-year-old security guard Thomas Cocatello was showing up for his shift. While approaching the south entrance of Kendall Hall, his headlights illuminated a bike chained to the bike rack. While others on campus would have known that this was Sigrid's bike because it was green and it was often parked there because they knew she was inside playing the piano, he didn't know whose it was.
Okay.
He just knew that there were no students that were supposed to be on campus for another 4 days. So after clocking in or whatever and getting ready to start his patrol, he called into dispatch to see if there was someone who was approved to be in the theater at that time, and no one was. So he went inside to take a look around. All buildings are locked at this point, so he had to use his keys to get in. Everyone did know about the faulty pair of doors that Sigrid used to get in, but I'm guessing he was just closer to another set of doors. This was at about 11:30 p.m. So he's inside, walking around. It's very dark. All the lights are off. The only bit of light that was coming from anything was the exit door signs. But he makes his way towards the stage and he notices something on the stage.
Oh, no.
At first, he's like, is there someone sleeping on the stage?
Right.
And it was a stage, so he questioned if it was just some kind of prop that was left behind from somebody. But as he got closer, it was a very disturbing scene.
Poor young security guard. He's only 22 years old.
Seriously, just straight out of college. I have a job. Here I go.
And at a college, like, this is not something you're prepared for.
Or on a stage. Like, it's just a wild scene.
Mm-hmm.
There was an immense amount of blood pooling around something under a large piece of white canvas. Watching his footing, he lifted the canvas to find the horrifically beaten nude body of a female lying face down.
Oh my God.
The damage to her head was so extensive you couldn't tell who it was, although it would be quick to figure out when they find her wallet later. There was blood everywhere. Blood was sprayed all over the sheet music that was sitting on the piano bench, and there was a thick trail of blood leading from the bench to where her body was, just a few feet away. Her head was wrapped in her blood-soaked blouse. It was tied around her mouth.
Oh my God.
The rest of her clothes were on the floor by the piano, except for her scarf and one earring, which was in a separate pool of blood. Her bare feet were splattered with blood and some mud. I have no idea what the mud was or if that was ever determined to be anything of importance. It's literally just mentioned and disregarded. I did watch like one video where they're showing her walking around barefoot, and I'm like, is that just their attempt though to
try and describe why
she would? I don't know. Her wrists had been bound at some point, but no longer were. So he immediately called for assistance. Every officer working that night showed up.
Oh my God.
There was no murder weapon left on scene that they could find, and there were no footprints. Whoever did this was meticulous or good at cleaning very specific spots because blood was everywhere.
Yeah. How did they keep
I have no idea.
fingerprints, footprints, all of that?
Mm-hmm. It is obviously assumed that Sigrid was playing the piano when she was attacked.
Mm-hmm.
Finding her nude, it was clearly assumed that she had probably been sexually assaulted in some way as well.
Yes.
I don't know why, but for some reason I have found it brought up that cops questioned if she was playing nude while playing the piano.
Not. I wouldn't think so.
I know. Be for real. Come on. This is a school. This is what gets me, and maybe it's this time in history, but it's not really. It's still today, the victim blaming. I was on the school archive site, the same way I found that other document, and I found the school newspaper, the edition that came out right after this, and this was on the 6th.
Okay.
The school paper was called The Signal. It talks about her murder. But apparently it wasn't big enough news that a student was brutally murdered and possibly sexually assaulted days before school started on campus because it was on the 3rd page.
Are you fucking kidding?
And like a little column. And the stories that were before that, the titles were Sex Therapist Answers Questions. Student Convicted of Pop Bust.
Are you kidding me?
No. There was just like this tiny title
by the way,
mentioned on the first page, but
like that's so fucked up. Like, by the way, a student, one of your peers was brutally murdered in the theater in the middle of the night, but don't worry about it.
All I can think about is they were trying to not
panic.
Well, scare some kids from coming to school.
That's what, yeah.
I don't know, but it's just crazy. Kids are about to show up there for school. I don't know. personally think the school they didn't want to draw attention to it.
They didn't want the parents pulling the kids out of school.
Exactly.
Because they think there's something horrible going on, which there is, obviously.
But it's just so much disrespect to her with the titles that came before that.
Agreed.
Crazy. And if you read the little article piece, it sounds like they're blaming her. The Trenton State College Police Community Relations Officer or whatever said, I would like to stress to people to take basic safety precautions like not walking alone. If students could just use common sense.
Then you won't be brutally murdered. Okay.
Like the
Thank
fucking
you.
audacity. First of all, she wasn't walking. She was killed
inside.
in one of your buildings.
Yes.
Second, her being alone shouldn't be a reason for someone to murder her.
Right.
Anyway, her being nude, I guarantee you, was not a choice unless she was having some kind of consensual experience with whoever this was prior.
True.
Maybe. And it just went really, really wrong. Or she was made to remove it, or it was ripped from her.
Right.
We don't know, but it just frustrates the shit out of me that they're like, oh, she was carefree. She was probably playing nude.
It's the 70s, guys. She just came in and ripped all her clothes off and like got into the music so much. No, like that wouldn't even be comfortable to sit on the piano bench naked.
Ew. That just reminds me of like people at the gym.
Oh, God.
Sorry. Some sweat you don't want to see.
No.
We don't know who did it. It could have been someone who approached her and she rejected them. Maybe they had a little bit of something of a relationship beforehand, but she was no longer interested. I'm inclined to believe that it was someone who knew her. We'll go over all of it. Not that she necessarily knew them very well, but it is at least someone who had some sort of obsession with her.
And they knew that she was there alone.
Exactly.
Often.
Because her murder screams as a crime of passion, as they call it. It was overkill to the max.
Okay.
And yet they covered her after. So that's just my opinion. It's someone who was in some way very passionate about her. We can't say the same of her back to the person. From the autopsy, it wasn't officially determined that she had been sexually assaulted, probably from like lack of injury inside her, but they did find dead heads of sperm inside of her. And if you piece together the rest of it, I believe she was raped.
Yes.
Or like I said, maybe it was consensual at first and then it turned bloody.
But it was known she didn't really date.
She didn't really date, no. And I even heard a rumor, and I couldn't find it again to like include it, but I did hear a rumor that she might have been a lesbian.
Okay.
So I can't really say.
Mm-hmm.
It was determined that she died from massive cerebral cranial trauma. She had 15 deep scalp wounds, multiple lacerations and fractures on her face and skull. Her nose and 2 ribs were broken. Her chest was heavily bruised, as well as her back, thighs, elbow, and her pelvic area.
Wow.
Other wounds are believed to be from her fighting back. It was a brutal, brutal killing, and it was rage-filled.
Definitely sounds like someone who knew the victim and the crime of passion, like especially when you focus so much on the face. They always say that psychologically.
Yeah. The medical examiner placed her approximate time of death between 7:30 p.m. and 10 p.m. that night, just before she was discovered.
Okay.
At the crime scene, they also found her backpack. Inside was her journal, a sketchbook, a decent amount of clothing, and some canned goods, which would later confirm that she was currently without a place to stay in and why she was at Kendall Hall. Her wallet was there. She had $7 in cash, her license, and some traveler's checks. And with that, they ruled out it being some kind of robbery.
Mm-hmm.
They searched her diary in hopes that it would tell them something. It chronicled her summer traveling and her thoughts on things, but nothing about fearing for her life, having issues with anyone. And it ended with that entry that I mentioned about her wanting to wake up early enough to play and leave before they caught her.
Right.
But her very last entry was... It's 11:43 p.m. They're breaking down the stage and they're going to turn out the lights and it's going to be dark here in Kendall Hall.
Okay.
Which is sad because ultimately that would be where she's found, in the dark in Kendall Hall.
Mm-hmm. But the crime happened hours later, according to...
The next day.
Mm-hmm.
Although they had her license, she did have to be identified, and that was done by the supervisor of the graduate music program, Dr. Stanley Austin. He could only identify her based on her hair and overall build because her face was completely unrecognizable. And other than that, the police had nothing to go off of. In addition to there being no footprints, there were no fingerprints, fibers, or hairs that they could use. And it was the 70s. Blood and other fluids couldn't really be tested. Whoever did it got away, probably being completely soaked in her blood.
Had to have been.
With the amount of blood on the scene and it splattered in every which direction, it would have been impossible not to be covered in her blood. In interviewing friends and family, both in California and New Jersey, no one could think of anyone who would do this to her. And I do want to take this moment to grieve for her family because they were a very tight-knit family.
Aww.
And I can't imagine getting that call when your daughter lives across the country.
It's parents' worst nightmare.
Wild. I mean, they were probably just extremely proud of her. Yes, she was independent and they had their worries. And then for this to happen.
Her younger sister will never be able to leave.
I know. Other than the evidence her body provided, the only other thing in question at the crime scene was the presence of the heavy white canvas covering Sigrid's body when the security guard first came upon her. Dr. Austin said that was a piano cover and it wasn't meant to be with that theater's piano. It wasn't for Kendall Hall at all.
What?
It was for a $10,000 Mason and Hamlin grand piano in Bray Hall, which was a building north of Kendall Hall.
How would they have even carried that in?
Bray Hall was a newer building and those locks did work. The piano cover is just this weird point of controversy in the story. How did it get to Kendall Hall? Who brought it over?
Right.
Was it intentionally used as part of the murder? Meaning, did someone go get it and bring it over just to cover her body? I'm going to give my quick opinion that I think it personally doesn't matter in this story.
Okay. It's just a weird
who
happenstance.
knows why it was there? Apparently, it's a pretty heavy thing to lug around. So it was done intentionally at some point to bring to Kendall Hall. But I think it's a very distracting part of the story in the end.
Mm-hmm.
Kendall Hall was the music and theater place. Maybe someone had a different use for it for some stupid reason someday and just never took it back. I don't think that the murderer was like, oh, you know what? People won't see her if I go all the way over to the other building, covered head to toe in blood, lug this heavy thing all the way back and cover her with it.
Yeah, they're like, I know the perfect thing to cover up this murder.
The stage was covered in blood.
Right, no.
And this cover was white.
Yeah.
Maybe if, the theater was all black, they did say it was pitch black. They were just trying to deter security guards, maybe from seeing anything on the stage in the dark at all. Give them more time to get away. But it's still stretching it as to what it would take to go get that thing.
I'm going to go back to the whole reason it was covered is because of the same reason psychologically they believe people cover dead victims after they've done something to them, because it's almost like a guilt or something. We've talked about it on other episodes. It means that the person knew her.
Yes, I do agree with why she was covered. The controversy is the cover in general.
Yeah, and I get that. And it's probably just what was around.
Well, no.
Oh.
That's the controversy here.
Because it's a piano cover?
Because of who would have had access to getting said piano cover.
Okay.
There are some people who think that whoever this was would have maybe gone to get that knowing it was a large piece of fabric to maybe drag her body out of the building and then realized it was too heavy in and of itself and then just decided to leave it on her. I spent too much time trying to figure out how heavy one of these things were for a grand piano. And I figured out that I would need to have a lot more information. I would need to know what size the piano was, all kinds of stuff. And I have to mention this too, just because it is in the threads and what people say. Some people think that Sigrid was the one to go get the piano cover and was using it as a blanket because she was staying there. And I'm going to say no, because they did find a sleeping bag. She had something.
Yeah,
and she was
backpacked.
sleeping on a couch. So I don't know why. I'm just inclined to believe that it was already at Kendall Hall for whatever reason, and the killer threw it over her at the last minute. The only thing that does raise concerns, like I mentioned, is why anyone went through the trouble of getting that to Kendall Hall for any reason. It required going through 2 different locked doors with different sets of keys to get to it at Bray Hall. So it had to be someone with access. And why they aren't coming forward to explain, hey, I brought it over to Kendall Hall for XYZ reasons, that was never confirmed.
Okay, so nobody admits to why.
Right.
Okay.
Apparently, there are only 2 groups that had both keys needed to access that grand piano, the campus police and the campus security guards. So it is something to question, unless they did just a bad job of locking doors one night. I don't know. Someone took the opportunity to grab it. I think that's always the case. I think you can't be 1000% sure, oh yeah, everything was locked. They're going to tell you it's locked. It's their job.
Or it's someone within the police or security that was planning it and brought that cover over days in advance.
Which I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, I'm guessing it's one of the theories.
Yeah. Custodians did have keys to get into Bray Hall as well, but not the room the piano was in.
Okay.
However, what I find curious, if we are entertaining the piano cover as being a key part of this murder in any way, is that I don't believe that only campus police and security guards would have access. That feels very stupid and restrictive.
The teachers would, the professors.
Exactly. What about the professors? You would think that a highly respected music professor would have access without needing to ring campus police every time they wanted to get into the room.
I would think so.
It's just a little suspicious to me that they wouldn't have access. Even with how expensive it was, people say, well, it was just really, really expensive. They didn't want just anyone touching it. They wanted to control that. I'm like, no, like colleges have freaking MRI machines that students do research with. Like,
and you go into a music department, like think about how many instruments are in there for the orchestra. Like there's thousands upon thousands of dollars in there. I know a baby grand or a full grand piano is ridiculously expensive. I get that.
But I'm saying like an MRI machine, isn't that like
tens of thousands of
like
dollars?
A ridiculous amount of money. So, I mean, I think
a professor that teaches classical piano would have access to that grand piano, I'm sure.
I can't find any reason that this piano cover tells us who it is, but it does throw out some suspects.
Right.
Which is what we're coming to now because there is a decent list and no one has been arrested for her murder as of yet.
That's such a shame.
Almost 5 decades later. But how do you line up suspects with nothing? So the first thing to try and figure out was what was used to kill Sigrid.
Okay.
Reports just say a blunt object. That could be anything. It was mentioned by someone that a chunk of wood that was used to either prop up part of the piano because it was wonky or used to keep up the top while playing could be the murder weapon. Apparently, the piano at Kendall Hall was nothing special. It was old. After she was murdered, that did mysteriously disappear. But I would think that if she was beaten that brutally with wood, you would find slivers in her skin and blood somewhere, even if microscopically.
Yeah, some splinters would have had to come off.
And there wasn't. It would leave behind something, I would think. In watching a documentary about this, the weapon suggested by the medical examiner and the police is that it was something like a bat, a pipe, or a police baton.
Okay.
Not the kind that are expandable, but like those solid, thick bat-like ones. They're called nightsticks. She had long cylindrical strike marks on her back.
Okay.
And who has those? The campus police and the security guards. And going back to the marks on her wrists, after some time, they were more distinct and were believed to be the markings of handcuffs.
Oh, interesting.
Although it was stated that the ligature markings could be consistent with something other than handcuffs, like a wire rope, for example. But in watching the documentary, the way the marks are described as symmetrical, it's like a handcuff.
Yeah, like the metal.
How they have those parallel double sides on the half of it. I feel like saying it's anything else is actually a stretch.
The police and the security would know that she's there.
Yeah.
I mean, they've seen her there all the time, I'm guessing.
The police in today's review of it also agree that these perfectly spaced lines across her wrists, it's handcuffs.
Okay.
Based on the crime scene and photos, they believe she was an inch from death, laying on her back with her hands probably handcuffed. And then the murderer flipped her over, took off the handcuffs, and in her last moment, she was reaching for help or just to get away, in her last moment. And this is assumed because of how she was found. She was found on her stomach with one arm outstretched, but there was an area right next to her body that had no blood that matched an area on her back that was also not coated in blood. So it is believed she was flipped at the last minute.
That makes sense.
So campus police and campus security guards were the first to be questioned and really the main people who were on campus at the time. And if we want to bring the piano cover into this, they are the only ones who would have, quote, had access if the building was in fact completely locked up that day and night during this time. All campus police and security guards were made to turn in their handcuffs and batons and to undergo a polygraph test. All were either inconclusive or they were cleared in other ways. They did test the handcuffs and batons for blood. They found blood on only one pair of handcuffs, but apparently it was determined to be from a separate incident. Who knows how great the testing was back then?
Right.
And that's the issue. Detectives today are going off of reports to find out this information. It's not clear how thorough any of this was, but clearly nothing stood out in order for them to arrest any of those men.
Okay.
But there were a few that stood out that I want to talk about. There was one situation in which one campus police officer supposedly confessed to another that he murdered Sigrid.
Ding, ding, ding.
Apparently, he was one of the officers on duty that night. The other officer who was told this information told the detectives that this particular officer said that and is known to drink and be mean to girls.
Okay.
The cops went out to the bars together and several agreed that he had a bit of an issue with asserting himself with girls. This wasn't the security guard that found her. This was someone else. I don't have his full name. I've only seen him referred to as Officer John. But he was cleared because he passed the polygraph test.
Oh, God, that's not, no.
So right there, he could have been the killer from the very beginning.
Yep, and we don't know his name.
I really think in this moment, case solved. But you decided to base it on a test that has now been proven to be unreliable.
Right, but back then they thought it was probably.
I'm curious if this person is still on their radar, and I'm going to come to why later. There was another campus officer, a sergeant, who was found to have come in that day that she was murdered on his day off, which was a little suspicious. He showed up around 12:30 p.m. that day. He said it was to do paperwork, which raised some eyebrows because unlike the obsessed cop TV shows that we watch where one of the cops just lives at the station because they have to solve something, the detective said it was odd because it is actually not common for an officer to go in to work off duty unless they're called in.
And what kind of paperwork do you have on a campus?
I know, and it's not even
empty.
open.
Yeah.
Yeah. But again, he passed a polygraph, so suspicion over, I guess.
Wow.
And lastly, there was one other security guard question as well, even though he wasn't a current security guard at the time. I do not have his name either, but he was alleged to have known Sigrid and was friendly with her. It's unclear why he was questioned or if he was ever a suspect, but he knew of Sigrid breaking into Kendall Hall and was apparently not harsh with her about it.
Okay.
So maybe he's just someone they're still looking at. I don't know. I feel like all of the authorities on campus got off scot-free.
And they're like the number one suspect, honestly. Like who else has the opportunity?
And the baton and the handcuffs and all of that. Now, the other group of people who were there at least the night before that needed to be looked into was the cast of the theater production.
Right.
And not just them, but anyone who attended, of which there were about 30 audience members. They questioned everyone they could. Multiple people reported to have seen Sigrid that night and some that knew that she was sleeping there. One cast member ran into her in one of the back rooms, which was the green room. She was laying on the couch, which is where she was staying.
Oh.
Whoever this was started up a conversation with her. She was talking to others as well and was invited to watch the show, which she did for a bit, but didn't stay for the entire thing. It is a high possibility that any of them could have been involved since some were in direct contact with her that night. But at the time, again, no one stuck out as a serious suspect and nothing came from that.
Okay.
The next initial suspect was the firefighter guy that she was staying with or about to stay with.
By the way, they're out of town.
Yeah, there's a lot of confusion around this particular person and family. His identity has never been released. There's some rumors that they had a thing going on, an affair or something, but I have absolutely zero evidence for that, nor do we even know where that rumor came from. He was supposedly on this trip with his family, so I'd say that's a pretty solid alibi.
Yeah.
But it's never been released what the alibi actually was and why he wasn't a suspect. I think the curious part about this person is that we have no idea how they even knew each other and how did she come to live with a fireman.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So maybe he was a suspect. Maybe he still is. I couldn't find that he was actually cleared of suspicion, whoever he is. And then I found somewhere else that, again, that she wasn't even yet staying with them. This is a very weird part of the story that no one has exact answers on.
Okay.
I personally just get the idea there's nothing to worry about with that person.
Yeah, he's off on a family vacation.
Right. Now, there was something else that happened around the same time that should have raised some flags, but for some reason, authorities dismissed it. 5 days after Sigrid's death, and just one day after school started back up, There was another girl who was assaulted on campus.
Uh-oh.
A student was returning to her dorm after midnight and came back to a light on that she did not leave on.
Uh-huh.
A man was in her room.
Oh my God.
He said his name was Charlie, and he chased her out of the room and down the hall until he cornered her.
Oh.
He exposed himself to her, and she screamed. And when she screamed, he started to beat her.
Oh.
He only fled the scene after other students started coming out of their rooms to see what was going on. He was described as a black man, about 5'9", with short hair and wearing a dark blue Trenton State College t-shirt.
Okay.
Authorities were questioned about this and said that there were no ties between the two assaults. And I'm just not sure how they determined that.
Yeah, because there's no evidence on Sigrid's unless it was just...
Well, I'm just saying there's two women attacked in a matter of 5 days.
And you're like, no, they can't be
on
connected.
Campus. Yeah, it seemed like they were quick to say
Dismiss.
no.
Mm-hmm.
No. And one was brutally murdered. Like, how are you
Right.
going to make these people feel safe here? And maybe that's why they dismissed it.
Yeah, it's all about cover up in this kind of situation, maybe.
I think that it just is one of those things where you would have wanted them to look into it further. Maybe if that guy had the privacy he needed, he would have done that to her too.
Mm-hmm.
You never know.
Mm-hmm.
He was already beating her after she rejected his disgusting
Exposure.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe he did the
Like,
same thing to Sigrid.
That's a quick escalation.
Something's wrong with him.
Yep. And he is staying somewhere on campus
Right.
where he can just easily pop up when there's
Exactly.
an opportunity.
So that just seemed like a weird one that came up to me and then just wasn't really addressed. So with that, though, they were left with no one.
Oh my God.
They had no clear suspect. They didn't have much evidence. They had some theories, but none that panned out. And they were under pressure to solve it. So they had to do something. Of course, they questioned if they found the murder weapon, maybe it would lead them in the right direction. Maybe the murder weapon was discarded nearby. There are 2 lakes on campus, Lake Silva and Lake Seva. Both are not far from Kendall Hall, although Lake Seva is definitely closer, only about 500 feet from the building.
Mm.
On September 21st, 2 weeks after the murder, they conducted a 6-hour underwater search looking for this murder weapon. They found nothing but trash, but I would say that wasn't a very long search.
6 hours? Yeah.
I feel like they didn't try very hard. The lake was 6 acres and it's about 10 feet deep. And I'm not sure why, but they didn't even search the other lake. So
Is it just like a half-ass effort? They're like, we tried, but not really.
and then that was it. Her murder became a cold case.
Wow.
They had interviewed hundreds of people, but in the end, they had no suspects and they had no additional evidence. But over time, less and less attention was given to it. New cops would come on and it would be looked at again, but nothing would happen with it. Now, that isn't to say that some of the cops involved were not trying. It did and remains to haunt many that were on the case.
There
It's
just
that
wasn't anything.
It's a frustrating case. They
Yeah.
had nothing.
Uh-huh.
But sometimes it takes just a fresh pair of eyes and a new way of thinking. A passionate individual with the drive and time to put their all into it. But for me, until that happened, it's hard to not feel like she just wasn't important enough. Like,
yeah, it feels like
she
it.
was brutally murdered on campus.
Yeah.
Life seemed to go on.
Mm-hmm.
She was never memorialized, not really. There was a scholarship for like a short time in her name, but that doesn't exist anymore. And she was talked about in the school yearbook that year, but they misspelled her name.
Wow. Come
Otherwise, she was forgotten.
on. That's
it seems.
horrible. This poor soul.
Her story became a ghost story, with many students and staff not knowing what actually happened. Over time, it was twisted into something else and rumors spread. It became lore.
Oh.
But she was a real person and her
Yes.
life was ripped away from her.
She had all these dreams and she was pursuing them, and just out of the blue, somebody brutally attacked her.
Soon, many people didn't even know her name. She was
Aw.
just the girl who haunted Kendall Hall. Sure, some people of the town know of her and what happened, but every year it's a new set of students.
Mm-hmm.
Staff moves on, new staff comes on. For decades, stories have been passed around about encounters that students and staff have had at Kendall Hall. I've read about some even recently online, comments on posts about her from current students and their experiences, how creepy Kendall Hall is, and that they're scared to go in there. Doors open, windows slam shut, objects seem to move on their own. People bring others there to spook them out. You can hear the piano music coming from the stage, but no one's there.
Mm.
Some of the stories that came about to explain the presence there are nothing like what happened. Some stories talk about suicide.
Oh,
Some are about a musician who was strangled to death with piano wire. One
Wow.
crazy rumor, because it happened on a stage, is about a girl who was tortured in many different ways in front of an audience before she died.
wow. People just,
And it's gone on for years and no one knew
no
the
one
real
knows
story.
the real. Yeah, that's so disrespectful.
But one student heard about this ghostly stuff and decided to look into it.
Okay.
This is Scott Napolitano. He was a film student at Trenton State College. In 2002, for his senior year, they had to do a thesis film.
Mm-hmm.
It was a group project, and someone suggested that they do a ghost story.
Okay.
Afterwards, he heard about the ghostly happenings on campus, and in trying to find out more about that, it was clear that no one really knew what happened at all. He spent weeks in the library scouring through stacks of microfiche. He found enough about what happened that they finished the film, but it was not the end for him.
Okay.
It stuck with him.
Well, yes. Because
And
it's
ever
unsolved.
since,
Yeah.
he focused a lot of time and effort into solving her murder to this
Good
day.
for him.
Recently, as of last year, his efforts and work with the police caught the attention of a Netflix series, Unsolved Mysteries,
Mm-hmm.
because her story needed to be heard. And he put the work in. Over the years, with the help of detectives on the case, they started to really look into every detail, talk to as many people as possible. This is decades later, so some of who they may have been able to at least tie to the school when she was murdered, like some officers, some people from the play, etc., they had already passed away.
Yeah, of course.
So it wasn't perfect, but it brought up many questions and a lot of information up to that point that many did not know. So we're going to go over those details.
Okay.
The first bit of information I came upon, it's not mentioned in the documentary if you were to go watch that, but I came upon his name through message boards on Reddit.
Okay.
People really like him for this murder,
Okay.
which is a weird way to say it, but I think more because he's just an interesting character more than anything. And so I'm just going to let you be the judge. This is Sidney Porcelain. He was part of the play.
Okay.
The play, by the way, was called JB. JB is a play written in free verse by Archibald MacLeish, and it is the modern retelling of the story of the biblical figure Job.
Okay.
Apparently, at some point when she wasn't traveling that summer, she made her way into Kendall Hall in July while the cast was doing rehearsals.
Mm-hmm.
He saw her playing on the piano and introduced himself. He told investigators that he was impressed by her playing and asked her if she wanted to perform the music for some of the songs that he had written.
Okay.
She agreed to, but then she went on her backpacking trip and they didn't see each other again until the night of the play.
Mm-hmm.
I guess he gave the cops a good enough alibi, but people today are still not convinced, it seems. I was trying to find the information again, but I couldn't go back to it. It was one of those things where you come upon a little bit of something and then you cannot find the source again. But I did read that they had some kind of argument at some point, but I couldn't find it again. So I'm just leaving that there.
Yeah, I was just thinking,
Okay.
what's the motive? Unless she told him that his songs were dumb.
Maybe. He described Sigrid to the cops as someone who was very friendly, who told her business to everyone.
Interesting.
He thought that she was the natural victim type that could easily be taken advantage of.
Oh.
The reason people are wary of him is because he tried to insert himself into the investigation, saying that he was a psychic.
Okay.
And some bright cop thought, yeah, this is legit. He was a suspect, but now he's going to help. Okay.
Okay.
They let him touch some of Sigrid's things to see what, quote, vibrations he could pick up on. He went on to describe, without supposedly knowing exactly how she died, that he got the vibrations that she was beaten on both sides of her head. He even gave up an initial that he thought could be the killer's name. S.
Okay.
It could have been to deter them away from suspecting him, but then he
Yes.
said, well, it could just stand for Sigrid. Maybe that's what I'm getting.
He sounds like a very unimpressive psychic. And yeah, he could touch everything and then like fingerprints or whatever would be.
Yeah.
Mhm.
He also said that he had a premonition the day she died, but didn't really understand it until finding out what happened to her. He said he saw someone who works with wire as her killer. I'm not sure why he was entertained. Maybe because they were desperate. There were no real leads.
True.
And, it's not like psychic stuff hasn't worked in some cases.
Yeah.
He had opinions about other murders as well. For instance, and I think I brought this up way ahead of time in one of your episodes.
Oh, about John List.
John List. the man who killed his wife, mother, and children.
Right. And it was in New Jersey, so that makes sense.
He claimed that John List was dead and that there would never be any justice.
And we know he's dead wrong, so
yes,
this guy's not a psychic.
He was good with the details having to do with Sigrid's murder, but he had
That's
this
he
alibi.
Did it. No.
I know,
It's
that's
easy.
what I'm saying.
It's easy to come up with the details when you did it.
But apparently there's this alibi, and I'm like, well, how rock solid is that alibi?
Yeah.
So I don't know. It doesn't mean that he did it,
Yeah.
but it's just something to throw out there. He also wrote mystery novels. I don't know. He just comes off just from articles as a like, look at me type of guy, which is just very interesting.
And he could have just been that.
Yeah.
He was just capitalizing on
Right.
the tragedy.
But what about other cast members of the play? Remember, one of them found her sleeping in the green room.
Mm-hmm.
Pleasantries were exchanged, and she was invited to watch the show. She watched it from some stairs for the first act. One cast member, a girl, said that she was friendly, happy, and conversational after the first act. But about an hour and a half later, that same girl ran into Sigrid again, and this time Sigrid was upset about something.
Oh.
She said something about getting into an argument with a man and that she lost the argument.
Oh, no.
People can only assume that this argument was with a man that was there that night.
Mm-hmm.
This was 1977. There were no cell phones. No one is on campus but these people. She was inside Kendall Hall, so that narrows it down. But an argument doesn't mean someone killed her.
Truth.
We're not just killing people we have arguments with.
Right.
The same girl saw her one last time right after the play ended, and cast members were starting to leave around 11:30. This was on the 3rd. And it would just be less than 24 hours later that she was brutally murdered.
Mm-hmm.
So further along into the investigation, suspicions are raised about one particular person. His name was Charles Judkins. He went by Chuck. He was a member of the play. He was the person who found her in the green room.
Okay.
We don't know what their conversation was, but it was friendly enough at the time. He offered her a beer, and Sigrid actually had in her possession a copy of the playbill, and she had his name circled and wrote next to it, "Nice guy, gave me a beer."
Okay.
So now detectives are questioning if Chuck was the man that she argued with. So this is all information current detectives today are having to find out about all over again because of how long this has gone on.
Mm-hmm.
There isn't a professional handoff on cases like this. As time goes on, cases lose focus. It takes a new person coming on board to say, hey, mind if I try and solve that one?
Yeah.
And that's what we're dealing with here. So looking into Chuck, and this was something Scott Napolitano discovered, he wondered innocently what was Chuck's role in this play. Well, in JB, Chuck played a cop.
Oh, so he had a baton and
He had
handcuffs.
handcuffs, all of it.
Oh.
And those items were never tested. And who knows where they are today. Of course, back then, like with all other officers and security guards, Chuck also passed a polygraph test and was cleared.
Yes.
But something just stood out about this guy enough for detectives to feel like he could have been involved.
Mm-hmm.
And really, he stands out as even more of a suspect than campus security now, in a way, because he had that
Interacted with
personal
her.
interaction with her.
Mm-hmm. And he may have thought it was flirty, and then she rejected him.
And he becomes even more of a suspect around 2011, 2012, when a woman named Susie Banks is interviewed.
Oh.
She responded to a message board post from Scott.
Okay.
He posted about the murder, asking people to contact him if they felt that they had any information whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
She said she thinks that Chuck was involved
Oh.
because she dated him in the 80s. He was very abusive towards her, and he once told her that he could kill her and get away with it, and that he had done it before.
Okay, yeah.
And if you see a picture of Chuck, he does give off this creepy vibe. He's tall, very capable of overpowering her.
Okay.
Of course, back then, because it wasn't available at the time, DNA was not tested.
Mm-hmm.
Around this time, after speaking with Susie, they were able to test and come up with a partial DNA for a male individual from her blouse that was tied around her head.
Okay.
They did what they could to push for a sample from Chuck, but it was an uphill battle, and they were never able to because he died.
Oh,
He died while they were trying to get it.
damn it.
He passed away in 2016. But they weren't done trying, so they reached out to Chuck's family members to try and see if they could get a partial match that way, and Chuck's brother agreed.
Okay.
But it was not a match.
Oh,
And
damn.
it was devastating for everyone because they really thought they had the guy.
Yeah.
He checked off so
Everything.
many boxes, but in the end, the DNA did not match. So
Okay.
Chuck is out, and everyone's back to square one. But here's someone I think could very well be the murderer. The night she was discovered, when all the cops were on the stage, at first they could only use their flashlights to take in the crime scene because the entire building was dark.
Okay.
It was a very old building, and in the theater, it wasn't just light switches on walls. No one knew how to turn on the lights.
Oh, because it's like the lighting panels.
They had to call the school's electrician to come do it. It was a process, but he turned on all the lights and finally they could really take everything in. Immediately, I'm thinking, the lights had to have been on before. She was playing music.
True.
So that means someone knew how to turn off the lights after murdering Sigrid.
True.
At first, I was surprised to not find people talking about this lighting guy. Like, I watched this whole documentary and nobody mentioned it. It was just like, the lighting guy came to turn it on. And I was
And
like,
you're like, wait a minute, what? Who's this lighting guy?
But at the end of the documentary, someone does mention him. Although no longer on the case, retired Detective Julia Caldwell was a big part of uncovering some other interesting suspects. She became obsessed with solving the case, but that didn't come to fruition before she had to retire, just as that has happened for several other investigators who have tried to solve this case.
Mm-hmm.
Julia's young, but she was injured in the line of duty, so she had to retire for medical reasons, but she's still very passionate about it. She just no longer has access
to all the info, yeah.
to all the information. And so she has her own theories, and she narrowed it down to 12 men she thought could be involved. And after more detective work, she narrowed it down to just 2 men.
Oh.
Who in her mind she thinks are the number one possibilities.
Okay.
No longer being a part of the case, she can only hope that the current investigators on the case will follow through on these. But one of those men was the lighting guy, who was part of the production in the play.
So he was there and knew she was.
While talking with one of the female witnesses, she uncovered that during the play that night, that this lighting guy, his mood had changed drastically at some point during the play. And who else's mood changed that night?
Yes.
Sigrid's. Julia believes he is who she argued with that night.
Okay.
Also, he had keys to the building, even though he tried to lie about it to investigators. But of course, the same old song and dance, he passed a polygraph. So they let him go.
Okay.
But he too would have had access to the cop uniform and accessories, I'm assuming, after Chuck took them off.
Yes.
It's very possible that he snatched those things up from a dressing room or something. So very possible suspect here. The other person Julia believes is another very viable suspect is a maintenance worker, which is someone that honestly matches a lot of the needs as well.
Okay.
They have keys to get into the buildings. They knew Sigrid and her comings and goings in the buildings she wasn't supposed to be in at certain times.
Mm-hmm.
And they had plenty of items that could have been the murder weapon, if you think about it. Broomstick. There's just a lot of different things they would
in
have
their
access
closet.
to.
Mm-hmm.
This particular suspect from past interviews made it known that he did have a history of letting Sigrid into the buildings. And in Sigrid's bag, this maintenance worker's contact information and address was written down on a piece of paper.
Okay.
So there was some type of relationship here. What kind, we don't know. Maybe he wanted more from her.
Mm-hmm. And she just
for
wanted
doing
his,
her favors, or whatever.
And maybe she just had his information so she could get in and out of the building. Very black and white.
And she rejected him.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he offered to let her stay with him.
Yes.
And that's why he gave her his address and she didn't want to. She would rather have stayed in the building.
That's true.
Of course, there's some information that maybe they were intimate. I don't know how old this maintenance worker was. I have no information. Don't know. But they were seen together more than once by other students in campus security. So at least friendly.
Okay.
He did a lot of things for her. My opinion is she just either didn't reciprocate or she didn't want to go stay with him because he was offering.
And then
That's how I take it.
Got rejected.
Julia found out that shortly after her murder, this maintenance worker was fired. He had substance abuse issues and he went into a detox program.
Okay.
And he was not polygraphed. So he is
that sounds very
other
viable.
good suspect. Mm-hmm. So I hope they pursue these 2 leads because that's where the story ends for now. I still think a police officer is totally possible. I think this maintenance worker is totally possible.
Right.
It's really hard to decide on this one, to be honest.
I couldn't narrow it all down. And then you've got Chuck who said, I guess the DNA cleared him, but still, like, that's weird.
I just think he was
away.
a really creepy guy who was abusive to the girls that he ended up with, but I don't think he did it.
You don't think he did it?
I think he might have killed someone else, though.
But that's true.
He did say he did. So it just might have not been Sigrid.
I'm just going to assume every man I meet has killed someone. Not really, but maybe. Yeah, this is hard. But we know like maintenance workers and just like people around, like the lighting guy, those are murderers in so many cases.
Yep.
Because it's just the opportunity and they kind of can fade into the woodwork and not really be thought of because everyone goes for who knows this person.
Well, because they also think that those people are lower than them.
Yeah, true.
I think what we can say with certainty is that whoever did this to her knew her and had access to several things. They knew she was there.
Yep.
They knew she would be alone.
Mm-hmm.
They knew how to get into a locked theater and they knew how to turn off the lights.
Yes.
And even though it is not said with 1,000% conviction, had access to some handcuffs.
Yes.
The murder weapon is still in question, but it's just something long and somewhat thin, it sounds like. It didn't have to be a baton. Although one of the campus officers and security guards, again, it does still really strike a chord with me just because we know that those guys, a lot of them, unfortunately, and we're not naming out everybody. We know this, but there's a lot of sexual abuse and stuff like that that happens with a lot of cops. Control.
Yes.
It's a control thing.
Not all of them, once again, but people who are domestic abusers or on a power trip are attracted to those types of positions. It's just the truth of the matter.
And even the detectives today will agree. How well were they all looked into?
No, because they're looking into their friends and coworkers.
Yeah, I think the lighting guy and the janitor, they're good suspects, but we have a huge missing piece with the security guards and cops because we don't have any details on them. Nothing. No. I feel like they were let off the hook somehow, some way. All of those currently involved in the case or in the recent past believe that the case will be solved. It's a matter of time. They believe it's solvable, whether that will be from new information, now that Sigrid is finally kind of getting her day in front of the world.
Right.
Or for something like genealogical testing, which is solving old cases.
Yes.
Left and right. Apparently it's very expensive.
And it takes a while. I feel like we come across that on cases. Sometimes they'll be like, we submitted it, but it could be years before they know.
Interesting. Yeah. I haven't looked into it too much, but it's not like they can just go do it. There's a lot of red tape around it. But Sigrid deserves justice.
Yes. Figure out what monster did this to her.
She was forgotten for far too long. She was just a ghost story to scare new students, and that's not right. She was brutally, violently murdered by someone who knew her. She had such an amazing life ahead of her, and her poor family still does not have answers. She was an integral part of that family, and losing her was just pure devastation. They didn't talk much. They weren't very vocal about it, but it was a loss that you can't imagine. She was the first, talk about it? And she was this prodigy, amazing spirit in this family.
And it's a completely senseless act.
Absolutely. Some evil man decided to take her life for reasons we don't know, but I have a feeling it is why so many women are raped and murdered today. Rejection. That's it.
Yes. Ego.
She was needlessly murdered.
Because she didn't want to interact with that person in the way that they wanted her to.
Yes. So I hope soon we have some good news that this is solved. If we find out, we'll let you know.
Yes,
there is
please.
one little bit of good news was that in September of 2024, with Scott Napolitano's help, Sigrid did finally receive something to commemorate her presence at the school. The college dedicated a piano practice room and its music room to Sigrid.
Nice.
So there's something now.
Good.
It only took almost 50 years.
Yeah, there should have been something a long time ago.
So that's the story. And yeah, let us know. What do you think?
Who did this?
There's some good ones out there. I think there's just not enough of the personal stories to be like, oh yeah, definitely that person. Oh yeah, definitely that person.
And there's probably pieces to the story that are not public like they do in many cases. There might be something that the police are holding.
But what? It's been almost 50 years. Get to it.
Yeah. Get to it.
Hopefully
CODIS works.
Yeah. That's what I'm thinking will tie to someone.
Mm-hmm. Just like the case with the Girl Scout in Colorado.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, thank you for waiting for us to come back. And hopefully this story was an interesting one.
And Jessica will keep looking for episodes that are not true crime.
I will keep trying.
Your first one back. You were trying to do a haunting. And yeah,
I was trying.
She will get there. Well, once again, we're happy to be back, and we will have another new episode next Tuesday that I'm working on right now. I'm not going to tease it yet, but I don't believe it will be true crime. But, we're always open to changing our minds because we have not recorded it yet. Now that we're back, we missed, 6 weeks. We would really appreciate if you're enjoying our podcast that you go on and leave a rating, 5 stars, and any kind of comments about why you like the podcast. Quick little sentence.
A blurb.
What, 2 minutes?
Kendra and Jessica are so cool. I wish I was friends with them in high school. Just kidding. You didn't want to be friends with me. No, I was cool then too.
I've always been
talking
cool.
about. I've always been the best. Are you kidding?
And we will have our listener episode coming up soon.
Yes.
We call those lab reports.
For any of you that are new, you can send in any stories.
Yes.
Something in your hometown, something you experienced, whether that's witchy, woo-woo, alien, or stabby. And send those to lucidlabpodcast@gmail.com.
And I think that's all for now.
Yes.
So in the meantime,
Stay lucid.
bye.
Sayonara.